My name is Stella Bogonko, co-founder and CEO, Jacob's Ladder Africa. Jacob's Ladder is basically focused on workforce readiness in terms of the green economy in Africa. We do this in three main ways. We run an early stage startup incubator for young people, focused also on young women, trying to enable them to be able to take their ideas to pre-seed funding stage. Um, and then we also run an Africa-wide climate ambassadors program, which works with mid-career professionals to basically advocate the Africa narrative, which is shaping the opportunity narrative. We believe that Africa is competitively has a huge competitive advantage right now as far as climate change is concerned, whether it's the arable land, the large arable land, or the youth workforce, or the critical minerals. Talk about renewable energy. We have a lot going for us, and if we can only have the right leadership on the one hand and the right programs or interventions, we'll definitely be making headway. And then third thing that we do is we work with local governments to design bespoke programs that are targeted towards working with the communities to be able to design programs that then create jobs at the grassroots level. So we do both advocacy as well as actual design of programs, design and implementation of programs. I'm excited to be here, and happy Women's Month to everyone.
Thank you. Darren, just a little brief about yourself.
Okay. Thank you and good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Greetings from Cairo here. My name is Jerry Fajrito. I work in a multilateral financial institution that represents over 50 African member countries across the continent. Our focus basically is to promote trade in all forms and to also support factors that enable trade. And the whole idea from my institution's perspective is we want to facilitate trade amongst African countries, but we also want to promote and grow and deepen the relationships that Africa has with other members of the world. So South-South trade and the lot. And so our focus basically is to ensure that we look for ways in which we empower member countries to trade actively, but we also empower member countries to ensure that they have access to markets and the infrastructure that's required. And whatever it is that's going to take our raw commodities from just being raw to products that they can export and get value from, so that we are able to take the proceeds therein to create employment, to use the receipts to be able to empower people and build industries, and to also be able to get some level of value from exporting products that are just not necessarily in its raw form, but also have seen some level of value added to them so that the whole country benefits. So that's who I am and what I do in my institution in a nutshell. I'm also very focused in my individual life, in my personal life, on looking for how women have a voice, and the girl child is also promoted. So anything that enables promoting women, the youth, and the girl child is something I'm very active in my personal life. That's who I am in a nutshell. Happy Women's Day to us all.
Darren, it's really nice to know that we have someone with us today who has the money. So that's a good thing, because a lot of times one of the biggest hindrances, comes with capital financing and, all of that. And I think with that, for me, I'm extremely excited to have the both of you in this session. I think I can't wait to see what we can unpack. Obviously, we have to recognize the strides that have been made and the fact that there's been recognition on the role of women, especially in the fight against climate change. And for me, that brings me to, we've recognized that women have a big role to play. But then again, how do we support them to extensively support their communities, but also build innovative businesses that can help in the support, rather in the fight against climate change. And so I want to bring you in because you work with a whole lot of ambassadors from across Africa, some of whom I know, and I know the amazing work they do in their respective fields. And you've worked with entrepreneurs, I think, as well. What are some of the existing barriers that the reads that are really hindering hindering women, especially when it comes to
Thanks for that question, Maggie. I think I'll start from this point. About 2 years ago, we did a baseline survey where we wanted to find out what young people in Africa think about climate action and climate change in general. And we sought to understand what their unique challenges are. We did the survey specifically. The ones that stood out for us were Nigeria, Egypt, and Kenya. And if you were to look at the insights from that survey, you'd find that many of them, broadly speaking, were saying that they lack the knowledge or the skills they require to actively or meaningfully engage in the green economy. And the surprising thing is that the numbers were higher for women, which means that the barrier is even much higher for women when it comes to access to knowledge or the skills that they need to be able to participate. So skills is a major barrier. And then working with entrepreneurs, you find that there's a barrier as far as, of course, access to finance is concerned. But it's not just that the finance is not available, but it's that there are certain hindrances that
Yeah.
stand as a challenge for them in particular, the women in particular. And so I'm sure we'll delve into the specifics of when it comes to accessing.
Sorry, Darren, you might want to mute a little bit. I think we can hear some noise in the background.
Oh, okay. I'll put it on mute. Sorry about the noise in the back.
Thank you. Sorry, Stella. Please go ahead.
It happens in this era. So we found that the women in particular, whether it's maybe access to collateral to access financing, there's a lot of talk of increased climate finance flowing into the continent. But the challenge is that regardless of how much money flows into the continent, if we're not able to remove barriers like the need for collateral to be able to access the finance, or the model or the mode of what kind of finance is available to them. Many of them are asked for experience in specific areas. We have to be able to design instruments of finance that are relevant to women in particular. It's even harder for young women. So when it comes to women, it's a challenge, but younger women, you combine the challenges of being youth without experience for the most part, and then being a woman. So I find that the barrier there is the understanding of the uniqueness of the challenges that they face. There've been attempts to be able to address those kind of challenges. I'm sure we'll get into them, so I won't get into those. But for me, those two barriers stand out quite a bit: the lack of knowledge and skills, and then of course the lack of access to finance or relevant finance for the women.
It's a good thing that we have Darren with us today, because she provides the financing for a whole lot of projects. And when you talked about collateral, the need for collateral to access financing, I think this is something we have heard for a very long time, where a lot of women, not just in the green economy, will come out to say, my project is not viable. That's why I could not get that kind of financing.
Yeah.
And then one of the questions you wonder usually is, okay, what does that mean? Darren, what are some of the things you look out for, especially when you're dealing with projects when it comes, let's talk, for example, in the green economy, financing some of these projects? What are some of the things you come across, and maybe you could share with us that could be the reason as to why some of the women that Sarah is talking about are not able to access this money?
Okay, and thank you for that. And I'm happy she did speak not only to access to financing, but also some of the requirements that enable women and women be able to access financing. But before I move into that particular point, I want to speak about some of the things that we do generally to be able to bridge this gap. Because if you're going to present, if women are going to take an active part in this conversation, and they want to be enabled to be able to access financing, they cannot do it from that nuance of ignorance or a place where they are not up to speed or at par with their peers. What we are trying to correct here is an inequality of some sorts. We feel that women have to play catch up here. And so she spoke about knowledge, building the knowledge base and building the skill set. And it's one of the things that we are very, very, it's a role we try to play. We try to ensure that there's capacity building, and we roll out training programs, collaborate with other parties to be able to ensure that, look, women have their say and understand exactly what it means to want to partake in this discussion. If you don't know what you're doing, then the how becomes a bit more difficult. So capacity building and just ensuring that people show up skills is very, very important. And we are beginning to see that more institutions are coming forward to collaborate with institutions like ourselves. We are reaching out to other stakeholders across board and seeing how we can roll out programs, roll out mentorship, roll out market access, just give women a platform to be able to be part of the discussion. Not only the discussion in terms of raising funds or being enabled access to funds, but also knowing that they need to understand that they have a fundamental role to play. They have to come together as groups. They have to reach out to the grassroots. We have to come and collaborate. And we also have to be involved in the conversations with policy change, with frameworks, with all the nuances and the initiatives that the governments of various countries want to do to be able to intervene in this. So if women are not playing any role across the value chain, then access to finance is just one thing that may or may not unlock the full potential to us. So women have to play a role across the entire value chain. I just wanted to start with that. So capacity building and building our skill sets is very, very fundamental. I cannot emphasize this enough. And we cannot do it as individuals. We have to do it collectively. So women have to come together, and you would see that on the backdrop of COP27 and 28, we've had a lot of the Western communities come together to provide platforms, but those platforms that give access and visibility to women are for collective unions. That means they're looking for women groups. So we cannot stand as individual women trying to take an active role. We also have to know how to gather ourselves together, form groups that have shored up the knowledge base, at least have an understanding of what they're trying to achieve, how it will impact their communities and the lot, and then we can take part in some of these programs that are available and also use that knowledge to build up capacity when we approach the financing institutions, any financial services for the information that we need. Now, speaking specifically to access to finance, what do we typically look at? It has whatever it is that we are proposing has to be solving a problem. And then we have to understand how it solves that problem. Now, I always like to say that women are very dynamic. And the reason why we are dynamic is because a lot of the roles that we play just generally across our member countries typically have to do with being a major source of livelihood for the family and the community. And unfortunately, because we are involved in some of the more menial tasks, we contribute quite significantly to some of the emissions and the things that cause the degradation. But climate finance realistically does not know gender. So when we contribute to some of these issues, and the impact hits us, flooding, droughts, and the lot, women suffer more because the desertification we see in the Sahel region, it affects the farmland that women have to till to be able to provide to their families. It affects when we have droughts, affects their ability to be able to provide water to their crops and their animals. So we are impacted more. And the reality is that because we're impacted more, women often have to look for a way to make it work. So if you check some of the major mainstream conversations around climate finance and impact on women, you will see that when we had the encroachment of the desert in the Sahel region, women became a bit more creative in looking for how to create solutions, find a way to make sure that they were still able to at least use part of their farmland, get water for their crops and their livelihood, and just find how they can feed and impact their community. The point I'm making here is we are resilient. So while things do happen, women are very resilient, and that's the reason why we need to be part of the entire discussion. We need to be part of the solutions because we are impacted and affected. So when women typically come and raise financing, collateral at times is a problem, but beyond that, most times what we see is that some of the ideas or some of the concepts have not gone beyond concept stage. It's very difficult for me as an institution, be I a developmental financial institution or a regular commercial bank, to finance a concept that hasn't been proven. So what we're beginning to speak to, and what we're also trying to encourage women to do, is take things from being a concept to a stage where it becomes a bankable idea. That means you have to take the idea forward, gather the stakeholders, identify the people that you believe are relevant to taking it from being just an idea or a notion to something that can actually be implemented, that can affect the lives of people and the livelihoods of all the community and yourselves. So take it to the next stage and then look for all the various stakeholders. The government has a role to play, the local communities may have a role to play, the parties that are relevant to providing all the inputs have a role to play, the people that are going to help you develop or implement or operationalize your concept, they have a role to play, the people that are also going to help you bring in some kind of equity. Everybody has a role to play. So you have to identify who those parties are and what you need everybody to do, and whether you have the required skills, or you also have to leverage on advisors to help you show up your skills or support you. So it's when you have all these stakeholders together, then you can come and approach a bank and say, okay, you want to be able to finance a project that or a concept that is going to make this impact, and these are the people that you've aligned with and you've tested this model out with, and this is the role that everybody has to play. This is the level of documentation, the permits
Yeah.
and the licenses. And
Darren, explaining all of that from identify, get the regulation right, get the policymakers on board. That's like building an entire business without actually, you need the money to start that process. Am I not right, Stella? It's more like,
In fact, I was gonna raise my hand and just
yeah.
say, I feel what you're saying, Darren, but I have a challenge, and allow me to sort of like debunk or dispute one or two things that you said, or maybe just agree with you, but from a different angle. One of the things that I find as Africans, let's start globally. We all know climate change is a problem. There's a lot of financing that's flowing into it. But if you notice, we're not making commensurate progress. And I know that climate change is a complex and dynamic problem rather. But if we're to drill down, for example, to the African context, I feel like there's a gap between vision and reality on the ground. Vision or lack of vision, in the sense that I don't know whether we've even been able to define for ourselves what the problem is and be able to customize our own solutions, or even start from the point of asking ourselves what's working and what's not working. Let me give an example of our country, Kenya. We probably have some of the one of the largest numbers of NGOs, and now a significant number working on climate change in Kenya. Obviously, they've been working on different issues in the past. But the truth is, we're not making commensurate progress on the ground. So when we talk about climate finance, the truth is some of the finance that is sent this way goes to technical assistance as opposed to the projects on the ground. So you'll find, for example, let's say $100 million has been
But the
apportioned
money
to.
is not reaching the right people.
It's not reaching the right people. It's not reaching the women. It's reaching the technocrats who are designing the
So
programs.
Darren, you're sending the money to the wrong people. And as women entrepreneurs, even with their innovative solutions, they are not receiving the money. And I think that's the whole essence of this conversation. When you say projects have to be viable, what exactly does that look like?
And I agree with what both of you have said, but you'll be shocked that at times the difference might just be knowledge. So I agree that yes, we see more funds being crowded out to the technical advisors and the governments, but the real impact and the grassroots people that have some of these visions or at least can play a part in forming some of these visions and the concepts are not impacted. But realistically, we've not had we've not had a lot of funds that have been tailored to these women, but they do exist. In fact, I think it was at the COP27 that the IFC and a number of other parties rolled out some initiatives that were targeted to women coming together and being able to at least address some of the grassroots issues. And that's why I said knowledge is very fundamental. The first thing is women on an individual basis cannot access some of these funds. They have to come together. So a woman has an idea, she has to reach out to those that are in her local community and see how she can come together as a group to establish similar minded women that can contribute to the dream or the vision. And most times, that one concept affects the whole community. So getting stakeholders is not necessarily an issue. It's just knowing that you may need to work alongside and bring in other women of a like mind and form an association or structure. And then you can now begin to take advantage of some of the funding that's out there. So yes, there is a limited pool of funding that goes down all the way to the grassroots, but it does exist. That's my point. So we do have more funds higher up, but we do have funds that are gradually coming in towards the grassroots initiatives, towards just even basic things like just empowering women to be able to know that they have a significant role to play in terms of addressing the climate issues in their local community. We have funds that are tailored towards that. And like I said, it's about knowledge and knowing who these individuals that are ready to provide such funding are, and women to know how to tap into those funds.
Stella, before you come in, I just want to say, just as you come in, because I know that you have something to add on to that. Don't you think, Darren, that if it was that easy to access finance, it would actually enable and empower a lot of women to create innovative solutions? Like, if it was that easy to actually get the money, then it should be easy for us to create solutions.
I even have examples before Darren responds, and I feel like she's on the hot seat now. But let me just
like I said earlier, she has the money. and we're talking
Yeah.
about accessing the money.
Two things. I'd like to commend the World Bank in Kenya, who initiated a program called Financing Locally Led Climate Action, meaning programs at the ground working with local governments, but targeting specific groups at the grassroots level. So that's money trickling from a DFI all the way to the grassroots. There are parameters that are measured, there are specific people that are targeted. And then in Kenya, we have this policy called AGPO, which is accessing government procurement opportunities. And it's a law that requires that a third of all the money spent in government or through government has to go to women, youth, and persons with disability. Great policy, whether it's working on the ground, that's another issue altogether. But my point is there has to be mechanisms that make sure that the money is specifically targeted and not 20% of $100 million going to the grassroots. It has to be the other way around. A significant portion of the money has to go to the women or the youth at the grassroots. And then we have to be able to evaluate what's working and what's not working. Kenya has been successful as far as women groups are concerned. We've thrived on the backbone of small and medium, what we call circles here, or chamas or cooperatives, where women, table banking actually, they come together, they contribute, and be able to use that as collateral to borrow because they know they cannot access financing by themselves as individuals, which is fantastic. But even with all those structures put in place, we still have a gap as far as women being able to access finance because of I believe inherent biases that we have, not just in Kenya, but in Africa and globally. That's why we still don't have many women elected into office, because it's still part of our psyche where we believe that, her place is different from the leadership position or the place where the decisions are made. And for as long as we have an imbalance at the place where policies are made, the impact will be felt on the ground. I worked in a county government, in a rural area. And one of the things, and I worked as chief of staff to a fantastic governor, one of the first female governors in Kenya. And one of the things that we realized was that when you went to the hospitals, which had been built by men or the male governor, the pathway to go to the maternity ward was just rocky, completely rocky. And you can imagine when a woman is expecting and in labor, that's the last thing that you want. You want an easy place or easy process to get to the place where you're going to deliver. But for as long as you don't have women in those decision-making levels, then you have challenges as implementation is concerned. There'll always be issues where the women at the bottom of the pyramid or women in the lower ranks are able to benefit. For example, for yourself at AfriExim, it's great that we have you representing women, so that the policies have to be relevant to that woman in the village who you understand their challenges enough to be able to make sure the policies are relevant to them.
I've actually watched your thoughts on climate and leadership, Stella, this morning. And it was one of the things I was going to bring up to understand how women's leadership, for example, in environmental policy making and advocacy contributes to effective climate action plans. But also linking that to resources, I'm glad is something that you actually have highlighted. Now, to bring this question, are there any evidence-based you've seen in your spaces of work that have been successful in leveraging investments in women and girls to accelerate this green transition?
Okay, maybe I can just quickly speak to something along that, and I'll link it to some of the points she had raised before. I like what she said. She said that the impact is not going to be meaningful, especially if we don't have active levels of advocacy, and engagement at top governments or at least decision-making levels. And I do agree with that. And that's why financing is one of the subsets. Some of the things that we do as an institution is we're very big on advocacy. And what we try to do is we need to ensure that we are active in those discussions that ensure that women are, at least we have more women represented when it comes to policy making, especially in anything that impacts on the livelihoods of women, and the fact that women play a very active role in small and medium-sized scale enterprises across the continent. So that's general. But not only do we do that, we also want to make sure that they have a they are also invited to this conversation. So while we are advocating and facilitating these discussions, we also ensure that we want to bring in women or women groups that we work with as an institution to be able to take part in this conversation. Some of the programs that we run as an institution, you do see us have female focused panels that are speaking to some of these things. And in some instances, we also grant them visibility and market access when we are engaging and in discourse with governments. Why? It's very, very important that women have a say in some of these decisions that are being made, because these are things that impact us, like I said, more than perhaps our male counterparts across the continent. But the reality is that the way women issues are approached across the continent differs. In East Africa, we have some countries or some countries that are very active, more active than others. We have, without going into specific, we do have countries that have good women representation in government. Not only are they represented, they are key decision makers and they oversee very fundamental sectors that make an impact in those countries. Across West Africa too, we're beginning to see more nuances around us. So it's really not balanced across the continent. But the hope is that those countries are going to be a beacon and a model to the other countries that are playing catch up, So yes, I agree that maybe East Africa is a bit more advanced, but you can see West Africa catching up in terms of making sure that women are part of the decision-making process and are also being given some level of visibility. So at grassroots level, at government level, both local or state or otherwise, you see women playing a more active role, and they are part of the fundamental decision makers across board. So you did speak to Kenya, and I know that Kenya has its own nuances, but I want you to believe that these things are happening in East Africa and we're seeing more. And it's also encouraging people to be able to deploy funds to those groups and associations or to leverage on those women in such key decision-making processes, to be able to leverage on them and their office and the influence that they have to be able to support and drive not only passing frameworks or policies that will enable us gain some of these funds, but also being able to operationalize some of these concepts that are being developed. And that's what's going to attract the funding. Realistically, why would people crowd in fund when they know that the government of the day is probably not going to utilize the fund for the purposes intended, or there's even no framework to use or utilize those funds in the way that is intended? So those are key things that are also a fundamental part of this conversation. We have to ensure that parties like my institution and others play an active role in encouraging that discourse, in helping to form some of those policies, helping to drive some of those frameworks. And of course, that's the much we can do. We cannot impose the will for them to include more women in governance. It's just by making sure that at least those policies and frameworks are in place, and hopefully it can take on from there. Then we now go into, like I said, the other things that we now do in terms of facilitating and financing with banks. We have KPI focused financing initiatives where we are asking for certain KPIs to be in place, and we're also ensuring that we measure. Now we do have, like she said, we do have youth and women tailored funding that's supposed to enable women that play an active role in these small and medium scale enterprises, and it's typically tailored to women owned or women led. There are two different nuances now: women owned and women led institutions and enterprises. And the whole idea is to make sure that they are not taken out of, at least there's a major consideration for funds to be channeled toward it. So when we set KPIs with maybe institutions that we partner with, and we insist that 50% of whatever funds that we're able to crowd in must go to such initiatives, we also play an active role in ensuring that we now help to build capacity so that women can access such financing. We play an active role in designing the structural requirements that women have to fulfill. We don't want them to be asked to bring maybe land where they are operating in countries where land rights are not given to women. So we play an active role to make sure that some of the conversations that we're having do make sense and can be implemented. So it's something that is new and we're just rolling out. But those are some of the successes that we as an institution have actually been able, and we're proud of saying that we've been able to do. So we have those conversations. We started testing the model. We have pilot phases in place. And gradually, with all these members and all these parties coming to play, the grassroots will begin to feel the impact of what institutions like ourselves and our partners are able and willing to do.
So is this enough to fully empower women participate?
I think I agree with Darren. I think a lot is being done. The thing that I would probably I have been thinking a lot about lately is we need to constantly measure whether what we're doing is working.
Yeah.
And then if it's not working, pivot. If it's working, scale it so that there are more people who can benefit from it. So that's one of the things that I've really been looking at. Like if there's a lot of efforts, because the more you sit in these sessions, the more you meet people who are doing amazing work. We have to ask ourselves if really what we're doing is working, then why are we not seeing that impact being
Yeah.
scaled? And why are we able to measure? And so I like what Darren said, because it was going to be one of the things that I would say. So in response to that, um, the thing about KPI related financing is fantastic. You know, what others would call conditional grants or conditional financing. And for some of the DFIs, they've even taken it further, or donors have taken it further to say that it's actually going to be reimbursable, meaning that you do something, we measure that you've attained the objectives, and then you receive funding. Obviously, you're given a bit of a runway to go through, and then you're able to, you know, recoup by showing the results that you've had on the ground. I think that's a very good way of funding, because at times some of the funding, like I say, that comes this way doesn't necessarily trickle down to the right people, or doesn't achieve even the intended objective that for which it was created in the first place. And then the other one that I heard in a forum this morning that I thought was absolutely brilliant is coupling what Darren was saying around the lack of skills and the lack of experience, or the lack of programs that are, programs that are just at concept stage, and having this money that is available, but they're not able to meet the demands or meet the requirements to be able to access the funding. Perhaps what we could look at is graduated sort of like access to the funds, where they, as they increase their capacity, they're able to then draw down from what has already been set aside. In the sense that if I'm at concept stage, let's look at blended finance, you know, have that initial angel investing, or just, you know, de-risked funding that is able to help me try out my model in a safe space. And then as the concept grows, and I'm able to prove that it's workable, then move on to the next access. And then the other thing that, again, that I think is brilliant is being able to have the customer as your first source of investing, in the sense that if your product, if I can get the first customer to believe in my product enough to enable me to even just prove and give me confidence that what I'm doing is working, then I'm able to convince a donor or a potential investor. So perhaps we also need to shift their mindsets from the issue of accessing financing to grow the business from the onset, to get me a customer who believes in your product. Because women, men alike are brilliant enough to be able to say, if let's say you've sewn this, you know, top, and there's someone who loves it enough to be willing to pay for it, that will give me confidence, because it proves that there's market for your product. That goes for fertilizer, all that stuff. So we also need to shift our mindsets away from the finance, in terms of, you know, we have to balance. Let me not say shift. We have
Okay,
to balance.
that's what I wanted I wanted you guys to talk to us about as well, because I think this morning when I was having a chat with somebody about the conversation, they said to me that, oh, most of women projects in climate change are in agriculture. And I'm like, no, it's, you know, it's a whole lot of innovations and businesses there that
There's
go beyond.
consulting.
Yeah,
There's on the technical side, there's on the operational side,
exactly.
there is
So
across the agri value chain, you know.
yeah, so
So much.
I'm just let's assume you know, there are a lot of, let's assume there are women watching us right now as we're delving into this, and I'm enjoying that it's conversation, and you know, we are at least trying to understand from a finance perspective, but also from a policy and a business perspective. I think a lot of times when we talk about investing, we only looking at the money. We are only looking at that part of it. Talk to me broadly about investing in women in the green economy. What other avenues are there that anybody watching right now could actually, you know, exploit after this?
Allow me maybe to step in here and write on something that Darren said earlier in the call, and it's the value chain approach to projects, which is what we look at. Sometimes you can discount women, especially in STEM projects
Yeah.
or highly technical projects, because, like you said, they're largely pushed towards the menial jobs that allow them to balance between their, you know, responsibilities and being able to do the work. But then investing in women means that, in my view, that you create the enabling environment for them to be able to play in whichever part of the value chain they're able to play. And I'll give an example of e-mobility. One of the studies done in Kenya showed that women are shy of being riders because of the security concerns that come with it. You know, when someone onboards the bike and holds you a certain way, it can be a bit uncomfortable. So they're not able to be riders. But we realize that there are certain women that are coming together and putting money together and buying the bikes and then having young men riding. So it's still part of the value chain, but they're playing a different role to still be able to create green jobs in one way or the other. So I think that's one of the examples. The other one is when we talk about investing in women, we forget that those women were once girls. And the girls grow up with the understanding, with those biases and nuances that you're supposed to be just pretty enough to stay in the kitchen,
Yeah.
just good looking, focus on how you look, focus on how you dress as opposed to your mind. So we have to be able to begin to have interventions that are at the young girl level so that you build their confidence to know you are a leader. You can run for political office. You can be an entrepreneur. You can be an innovator. Begin to invest more deliberately in them so that we don't have to now do the patchwork that we do much later by trying to do work that is could have been done much earlier by building their confidence to enable them to know you can be whatever you need to be at a young age so that they don't have to struggle to find their place at the table when they're much older. So investing in women for me begins with investing in girls.
Thanks a lot, Darren. You've both of
Yeah.
you, as you're addressing that, I just want to add that both of you have extensively talked about capacity skills as one of the biggest challenges before we even get to the financing part of it. As you elaborate more on the investments, beyond the money, are there any other initiatives that you work with that go beyond that empower and support women to build their businesses?
Okay, so thank you for that. So I know I'd spoken briefly about financial education and literacy programs,
Yeah.
but there's something I just want to leverage on because I want to use it. I want to build on Stella's point. And she did speak about interventions from a very early age. And so I want to speak about mentoring. Some of the things that we as an institution do is we also have mentoring programs. Our mentoring at the moment is currently focused on women and the youth and ensuring that they are able to find a place and we can place a role in ensuring that they have adequate mentors. Mentors typically are maybe women-led businesses or women-owned businesses, so that they can see what the average struggle and the nuances around women-led businesses are. Just having a very hands-on and very dynamic approach to that. But the reality on ground is, and just leveraging on what Stella said, is that the real impact for some of those things would be when we can catch them young, like you've said, because internships are something that's general across the world today. And I think that program, with, of course, inclusion and feedback from parties like myself, we are hoping that we will get to that point where we're beginning to see that happen at a very young age, where we can take our young girls and get them to start interning on a continuous basis, because the benefit of such internships is when they can play a part and then see the different parts of the value chain of whatever companies it is that they are undergoing their mentorship program in. So I think immersing them early into such programs and having a very general hands-on approach into what it takes to be able to build a business, or at least see what it means to be able to operate a business, is very, very fundamental. And that shapes people, like you said, very early on, because you're able to see the kind of challenges or the general operational requirements that women-led businesses or women-owned businesses may have to face. They may not be unusual from typical businesses, but I can tell you from our various interactions that at times we do have some differences and some nuances that are specific to women-led businesses. And it just really depends on the general acceptability of women, like she mentioned, in certain climes. Using the example of the bike women, I like what she said. On the part of the women themselves, there was some level of discomfort. So it was not necessarily that the country itself was insecure or was not receptive to women riders. It was just that the women themselves may not necessarily be comfortable because of certain nuances that come with the nature of the business. But like I said about women being able to adapt, adaptability is knowing that, okay, why don't we come together and own these buses and employ the people that will support us in at least taking it to be operating this bus and these bicycles and providing the same service that we ourselves could not. That's just a step to show you that, when women come together, we can look for solutions to our own problems and still contribute, to the economy and generally to whatever objectives that we are trying to. So I think mentoring and internships are very fundamental. I think it's important that we start having those conversations about including the girl child early on, and then of course scaling it up also, to women across not just the small to medium scale, but even when people have established businesses, there should be networking platforms where they can come and exchange ideas and rub minds and see what other women-led businesses have done to address certain issues or problems that they've had. Just leverage on building one another up. I think it's very fundamental, and it's something that will help us at least achieve the same objectives and ensure that all these building blocks align towards the purpose.
Sarah, you mentioned a lot about leadership today, but also as I was doing a little bit of research earlier on, is something that you keep talking about in terms of accessing finance. And you've worked in the government, but you've also worked with entrepreneurs who are really phenomenal from all over the continent. What strategies and policies do organizations like Africatalyst? I know Africatalyst is doing so much, but let's look at also other organizations across the continent, but also governments. How can they integrate gender into climate financing policy frameworks?
So, in my view, I think when it comes to climate and policy, first of all, I like to say that climate is a leadership issue. And I'll just repeat what I said earlier about if we know what the problem is, this is the one thing that has brought us together in equal measure, maybe to something. Even peace doesn't come close, water doesn't come close, hunger, poverty doesn't come close to how climate has galvanized all the countries, and everyone is trying to do something about it. And from private sector to CSOs, you have every single person having their hands on deck. But the question we need to ask ourselves is where we have clear goals. For example, we're saying we are working towards 1.5 degrees. We're obviously way off track on that, but then we're still pushing towards that direction. And different countries are trying to do what they can. But the thing that I believe is lacking is leadership. And this is what I mean. That if we know where we want to go and we know what it will take to get there, but for example, we're not moving at the pace that we want to move, are you telling me that our presidents, for example, cannot make the decisions that are required to move things in the direction that we know and believe need to move? And yes, there are dynamics that we cannot avoid, like the political interests that come with climate. It's a very dynamic and complex situation. But then I believe that if the world wanted to head in one direction and to address this issue genuinely, we would have made so much progress. But the reason why we're not doing that is because there are other interests that underlie, or there are people that are just not willing to make the tough decisions that need to be made. And so coming to what kind of policies or what kind of strategies need to be put in place, I did reference, for example, perhaps let me look at it this way. We have NDCs that are cascaded from what is agreed at COP, the one meeting that countries sort of like push and channel to make sure that they have representation and their voices are heard. And then you have your nationally determined contributions. So those contributions are our own goals, things that we have committed to do as countries. We have to be able to make sure that at that level, the gender lens is captured when we are crafting, like they ought to be gender sensitive NDCs, to make sure that even as we are crafting the policies or crafting our targets, that there's a consideration as far as the gender lens is concerned. I'm sure all of us remember when the committee on COP29 was formed and there were no women represented in the committee, and there was a lot of pushback and changes were made.
Yeah.
That's one example. But having representation is one thing. And my mentor tells me this quite a bit. Just because you have a woman in position, that doesn't necessarily mean that women will benefit. We have to be more deliberate to show that one woman getting a seat at the table means a significant portion of women will actually benefit. So it starts with every single one of us being able to make the difference where we are, and it starts at that policy level and having representation of women. But then when it comes to now in the in-country, we have to demonstrate by having those women represented at the decision-making table, which of course means you can't address the issue of climate without touching on the political angle. And you can tell that I look at climate from a very political lens and from a very leadership focused lens, because I believe that regardless of the good intentions, in the absence of political goodwill, you won't make too much progress. And then finally, I gave the example of, for example, in Kenya, where we have the policy on AGPO, which is the access to government procurement opportunities. Great policy, but then there is a huge gap, and this is not just a Kenyan issue. There's a huge gap between policy formulation and policy implementation. We're not short of policies. We have goals, we have SDGs, we have all these policies in place. What we are short of is bold leadership that would then make sure that these policies that we've set and put in place are actually implemented. So that's what I would say.
Thanks, Stella. When I look at some of the statistics I put down that estimate an additional 6 to 10 trillion US dollars in the next 10 years to mitigate climate change, with some of the things we've discussed, especially when it comes to the challenges like infrastructure and incentives in place to support women, it makes me wonder, in this amount of money, will it be equitable? Like, will the women really be able to access this? But nevertheless, I think these are conversations we'll keep having. We will come back here and discuss some of those. Darren, for the women watching out there, because I know we're running out of time, I think we left with about 5 minutes. I want us to really bring it down to them. If you were looking for projects, and I know you've mentioned from my understanding, one of the things you're both pointing out is decision-making processes. Like, we need a lot of women in decision-making processes to be able to support other women, not just to sit on the table, but to be able to take the shots, to be able to decide and support other women. Is that how it looks like from where you sit?
Is that, sorry, I missed the last part.
Is that how it looks like from where you sit?
Is what how it looks like?
Like, when we say decision-making processes, we have women on the table, but are they taking the decisions?
Okay, yes. So we do have, like you said, yes, I do agree with that. We have the forums where we women are able to have representation. We have instances across member countries where women do have representation. But the gap for me really is, like I said, knowledge, and of course the skill sets that I'm building up capacity, like I spoke to. I don't know if you're aware that some institutions have been in collaboration to provide certain very, very specific gender-focused lines. I'll just mention a few of them. I think it was at the Innovate for Climate conference that was held in 2023. It was led by the IFC and some other members. And the good thing is that institutions like myself, we typically partner with counterparties like this in some of these initiatives. But let me tell you about 4 key initiatives that I don't think a lot of women are aware of. I don't think a lot of women know is available in the climate finance space. I think the first one is called the Women-Led Coal Transition Initiative, WALCOT. It basically is targeted to supporting communities that have predominantly been leveraging on coal, because we are transiting from coal to cleaner alternatives. Some of these communities are suffering. So there's a program that provides funding to support the miners and everybody that's associated in the coal value chain, just to be able to at least buttress some of the impacts of getting their economies to transit. I think the next one I'll quickly mention is the climate gender equity financing. It's between Amazon and the USAID, and it's a grant funding that is to women-led businesses and businesses that are impacted by women. Imagine you having access to grant funding. I don't know how many people are aware of this. I don't know how many people in Africa have taken advantage of this, but it's supposed to just enable you play a role in the climate value chain. And as long as you have a business concept that is along these lines, you should be able to access this. There's also the Clean Impact Bond. The Clean Impact Bond is basically working capital that is focused on SMEs. It goes all the way down to the smaller initiatives, the smaller businesses that we're talking about that may not be able to have access to regular funding, as long as you're also partaking in the credit value chain and you can prove and demonstrate. So it's targeted at the very low income brackets, and people that have initiatives. And it's something as basic as just changing your cookware from firewood to using gas-based tabletops, So you can imagine people communities being able to access this funding to be able to provide gas-based stovetops to their communities just because they've stopped using something as basic as charcoal fire. So some of these things are available, and as long as these communities are able to understand the requirements and come together and make a business case on how they want to apply, they can tap into some of these funds. Another one is the sustainability linked financing, which is KPI driven. And the impact of this is once you're able to prove that you have met those KPIs, what happens is that you get a step down in your interest rate. So it impacts your overall borrowing rate. So I just wanted to mention this quickly so that people know that there are alternatives out there. So we are speaking and we keep speaking about women taking a role and being part of policies and establishing frameworks and the laws, being active. But we also have to know that even when we now develop or we're part of the solutions, there are certain alternatives that are available to us that we can also quickly tap into, and it can make an immediate impact in our local communities. So I think that would be my own add-on to all that we've said today.
Yeah, as we wind up, I just want to take a few comments from you both on, the way forward, moving ahead. What advice could you give to the women out there watching? But also, I would like for you to touch on research and data collection, which I feel like we sometimes do not emphasize as much. From where I sit, I would think this could support, especially in terms of generating valuable insights. As you wind up, could you also relate that to me in regards to how it contributes to, in the context of green transition, maybe informing some of these decisions? Stella.
Sure. So I'll just respond to that and then maybe give my closing comments.
Yeah.
I did want actually just noted to make a mention on the issue of data because we are in the process of developing a green jobs index,
Yeah.
which will help African nations be able to monitor specific indicators that would help them know the rate at which they're creating jobs. And of course, there'll be nuanced around whether it's youth, women, gender, all that. And to enable just countries to be able to make decisions and know which indicators would help them move forward. Think of something similar to the ease of doing business index that would help countries be able to manage their own progress. So, and the backbone or the backdrop of that came from realizing that while there's global data, most of that data is not necessarily helpful, especially to the decision makers, in this case, the policy makers, or even DFIs, people with finance that they want to be able to channel to be able to make a difference. Right now, with all the climate finance going on, there has to be relevant data, African nuanced data that helps us know what are the top 5 sectors that will actually make a difference. Are we wasting our time by investing in some random sector or in these 2-3 sectors and then which countries, because Africa is not one country. Some countries will move faster. For example, if you invested in a battery manufacturing plant or that value chain that would then help the other countries benefit. So being able to look at those specific indicators that would help countries move along much faster. And so for us, we believe that data is one of those things that needs to be significantly addressed, and not because there's absence of data. It's because there's no nuanced and aggregated data that helps, that is organized enough to be able to make decisions. And because we are passionate about green jobs, that then became our focus. And that's something that we're excited about and hoping to announce very soon and also just launch very soon. Then the next thing in my closing remarks, I'd just like to say that while we speak about women, whether it's women, youth, or different people or groups that ought to benefit from climate finance, and we are speaking about investing in women and accelerating progress. One of the greatest investments that was made in me to even be able to that I've seen has given me more acceleration is not the amount of money that I was able to earn at one point. It wasn't the connections per se. It wasn't, all those were almost like offshoots of something that I realized was the greatest investment made in me.
Yeah.
And for me, I would say the greatest investment that anyone can make in a woman is the change in mindset. We are born into a world where we believe we are inferior. We are born into a world that naturally looks down on women. We are born into a world, and especially a continent, that is significantly patriarchal. And so you're constantly starting on the back foot, and the system is intent to make you stay there. And so the greatest investment that can be made in any woman, in any girl, is in her mind. If you can see yourself exactly as you ought to see yourself with an accurate mindset, there's nothing that you cannot do. Finance will be easy to come to you because when you walk into those rooms and you're pitching, the people invest in the people, not necessarily in the idea, because the idea is a function of who is pitching. So I would say perhaps we need to invest a lot more in our mindsets, more than even the other areas. And thank you for having me. I've actually had a really fantastic time. Thank you.
But I think it's very important that you mentioned the mindset, because I think it's something Darren also mentioned earlier on. But we still need the financing, to be honest. Darren, your thoughts as we
Yeah,
conclude?
indeed,
Yeah.
we do. And we are also, my organization is a very data-driven environment, and very data-driven and data focused. But there's one thing we believe in. We believe that the data that we need to be able to make a difference in how Africa addresses the climate concerns that impact on it. We are not necessarily the biggest contributors, but we are impacted severely. But that data cannot come from outside. It has to come from us. So we have to generate our own data, and we have to create our own solutions. We are the biggest advocates in that regard. We had spoken briefly about leadership, and Afreximbank takes a leadership role in saying that Africa's problems must be created by African solutions. So it's Africans coming together to see how we can make climate finance work for us, which is why we always speak about the gradual transitioning. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are going to make sure that we transition in a responsible way, balancing what we are doing right now, which is using the resources that exist, but also gradually letting our member countries know that there are cleaner alternatives that are available. And that's part of the reason why through the data that Afreximbank was able to at least gather, we were able to establish a collaboration between Zambia and Zimbabwe in creating a battery value chain. And the essence was because we believe that all the EV components are sourced, the resources are sourced from Africa. So why can't we take it to another level? Why don't we see production happening in Africa? And so we're actually collaborating with those two countries, sorry, not Zimbabwe, Zambia and the DRC. We are collaborating with Zambia and the DRC, and we facilitated those conversations amongst the governments and got all the relevant stakeholders involved to make sure that not only are we looking at the resources, just mining the resources and taking it out elsewhere to go and get it beneficiated, but we are able to add value in Africa, within those countries, and also see that the relevant components are manufactured here. The batteries are manufactured, the cathodes, even to the point where we are hoping that electric vehicles will eventually start being manufactured in Africa. The resources are here. The skill sets are here. The human resources and the mineral resources are represented in Africa. So we use data to drive that and to seek the collaboration amongst the governments. And it's something that we want to replicate in other sectors beyond the mining. We also want to replicate that in the way we go about in our agric and agro-allied processing, just so that we can do it in a sustainable way that does not harm or degrade the environment. Then I think all of that just speaks to who Africa is as a nation. We have beautiful minds and very strong-willed people, and we are naturally blessed with the resources to be able to take some of the roles that we are taking. So once again, I emphasize that the solution to Africa has to come from Africa. We will generate the data that we need and use it to understand what the issues are and look for the solutions that will work for us in a way that will not be detrimental to our economies growing. So while we are collaborating with the rest of the world, it has to be on our own terms and in a way that benefits our countries. I think that for me is one of the biggest things that I believe in and my institution believes in, and we're very, very proud to advocate and to promote in every instance where we have an opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, ladies. I just want to echo some of the things you actually have pointed out, which is education and training skills. Very key. I feel like at every moment you've been bringing this up for anyone watching out there. So finance is not really the problem, but accessing it, there are strategies, and I think there are certain things as women we also have to work as we move towards accessing the money. We talked about entrepreneurship and leadership. Sela, you've been very vocal on that. Women have to be in key decision-making positions, not just taking up the positions, but also be able to community engagement. advocacy. And I think that's what Africatalyst is doing, bringing both of you together today to share your experiences and be able to educate us and give us some tips and tricks on how to access capital and financing, and obviously policy and data. And I think for me, policy is something that is very critical, beyond just governments, but also looking at some frameworks that organizations like Africatalyst can be able to work with. I will end with this. Investing in women and girls not only advances gender equality, but it unlocks their potential as powerful agents of change in the transition to a more sustainable and resilient future. And I hope that this discussion has really been helpful to those that have tuned in, and to my panelists that have actually made time this afternoon to join us. Aderinsula Fajutan. I hope I did not butcher that.
No, you did well.
Senior Manager, Project Finance at Africatalyst. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thanks for your tips on how to access the financing, and obviously some of the experiences and some of the women you've worked with in your space. And then Sela Bogoko. I hope I didn't butcher that as well. And CEO and co-founder of Jacob's Ladder Africa. Sarah, thanks for making time. And to the viewers, to everyone that joined in this afternoon from wherever you've joined in from, thank you so much. It was really nice to engage with you and to learn from you. I personally learned a lot today. And I'd like to also say that this recording will be available on Africatalyst YouTube channels, on the LinkedIn and other social media channels. Darian and Sela, I hope this is not the last time we're meeting. I hope we can engage further. I feel like last year we had a conversation on the role of women in the fight against climate change, and I feel like this year we have advanced to, okay, we know our role, so how do we get the money? Yeah. So I'm hoping next year we're going to look at something else that is very critical at that time. And with that said, I want to say a huge thank you. And I think that's the end of the session.
Thank you so much for having
us. Very wonderful afternoon and evening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.